You light the fire. And then I'll show you something wonderful, a great ball of snow. That's a haiku poem. And all these poems, each one simply takes an image and says no more. And it's, you see, completely concrete and very simple. Occasionally it has in it something clever, as in, say, a haiku like, "The sea darkens. The voices of the wild duck are faintly white." But again, there is nothing, or let me give another example of a clever haiku. "A brushwood gate, and for a lock, this snail." Leaf fallen, flying back to the branch, butterfly. You see, there's something a little bit clever about those ones, and for that very reason, they are not the best kind of haiku. Better still is something like this. "In the dense fog, what is being shouted between hill and boat?" You see the image of a river estuary, and you can't see anything, but you know there's someone down there in the boat talking to someone up on the hill, and you can't hear the conversation. Isn't that great? Something, you can't quite put your finger on. The quality which in Japanese aesthetics is called yugen. Yugen, made up of two Chinese characters, both of which mean the dark, the deep, and the mysterious. But yugen is not like a great abyss full of black clouds and lightning in which there might be a dragon. That's not yugen. Yugen is the subtly mysterious, and is described by the poet Seami as to wander on and on in a great forest without thought of return, to watch flying geese appear and be hidden in the clouds, to watch distant fishing boats on the ocean disappear behind islands. Now, what in all these images is the connecting link? The connecting link, you see, I talk about it, but what else am I to do? You remember we were at a place in Kyoto called Shisendo, a poet's retreat and garden, and there was in there a stream. And finally, when the stream had gone through the garden, it disappeared through a bamboo fence into somebody else's property, rounded a corner, and was lost. Not knowing where that stream goes, never following it, but having somehow the inner feeling of it goes on to somewhere else. This is yugen. Or in so many of the beautiful gardens, I was looking at the gardens in one of the temples in Daitokuji the other day, and the lovely thing about them is they never conclusively end. There is always a little gate giving you a vista on to somewhere else. And if you systematically would explore the whole thing and know all about it, you would miss the feeling of yugen. But so long as you don't, and you let there be the suggestion that there is a pathway going out somewhere else to something beyond, you get this sense of yugen. Now, this sense of yugen is therefore involved with a kind of imperfection, not finishing things. So, in haiku poetry, we would feel, with haiku from a Western standpoint, that these poems are unfinished. They are simply titles. They are simply first lines of something that should go on to elaborate and express everything. But in this kind of artistry, one doesn't express everything. One leaves the best part unsaid. Because the work of the poet is not simply to impress everybody else with how clever he is and leave them speechless, but to evoke in the listener something. In exactly the same way, the art of the painter, in the tradition of Sung Chinese painting, is to leave something to the beholder's imagination. Hence, what is called one-corner painting. Say, a painter like Ma Yuan, or Bayan, as he is known in Japanese, is a master of one-corner painting. He indicates a line of hills somewhere near the top, and down at the bottom there is a single drifting boat and a fisherman. Everything else is vague. Now, here's the meaning that you are supposed to fill in the rest of the painting with your imagination. In other words, you don't sit there and imagine trees and huts and boats and mountains against the blank background. That's not the point. Any more than when you look at a path disappearing among the trees, that you sit there and think out what kind of scene it might lead to. The point is rather that the disappearing path, the disappearing stream, the blank in the painting, contains simply the suggestion of possibilities, which you don't actually explore. It's the suggestiveness that counts. And so, in the same way, the associations which haiku evoke. One that's sort of in this mood. This is all there is. The path comes to an end in the parsley. Now, you've got to go back to childhood to understand that. Don't you remember how as a child you loved to explore paths and to get right down among the stalks of grasses and weeds and see where it all goes? And how sometimes one of the eternal child stories is that you were one day walking along a little lane and you discovered a door in a wall that you had never seen before. And you opened it, and it led into a magical garden where all the bushes were covered in jewels, and there were marvelous birds and fantastic songs. And you came out because you had to get home in time for dinner. And the next day you looked for that door again, but you couldn't find it anywhere. And yet you knew it was there. It was just between this fence and that fence. But today it isn't there, and yet somehow it always is there. And so for every child, there is always a kind of a funny place that leads on to somewhere else, and you don't figure out exactly where it leads, because that would spoil it. You mustn't know. So all this haiku poetry and this kind of painting, which the Sung artists so marvelously mastered, is to evoke that sense of what I will just call possibility or potentiality without actually filling in any details. And that's real magic. It's done in another way by writers working in a completely different dimension. People like, say, Edgar Allan Poe and Arthur Machen were masters of it, in evoking a sense of extreme horror. When you want to give people the real heebie-jeebies, never be specific. Just as Poe in that story, The Pit and the Pendulum, it doesn't specify at all what was in the pit, but nevertheless gets away with leaving you with the sense that it was something unutterably horrible. This is the way in which to suggest the abysmally evil, and it's likewise the way to suggest the ineffably beautiful. Don't fill in the details. Indicate. Don't explain. And so, let's take some more examples. I want you to think of Ryoanji Garden. You've all seen that. One thing that is most important about Japanese gardens is the background in which you find them. You can't take Ryoanji, as people have attempted to do, and reconstruct it in Brooklyn, unless at the same time you take the background. And that's going to be pretty difficult to do. Now, what is that background? You'll notice there's a wall along the back of the garden, rather a low wall, but just high enough because it lies on the crest of a slope that beyond it goes down. And then beyond the wall, all you see is trees. So too, in many of the gardens around the temples here, you will see over the wall perhaps a roof. And then beyond that roof, treetops. And those treetops, although we're in the middle of a dense city, somehow suggest that outside that garden is a forest. There's something else. You know the quality of sky as you see it over the tops of hills that lie between you and the ocean? There's something very distant in the blue of that sky, suggesting miles and miles and miles, and gulls and pelicans drifting away into the distance. Openness. Something that, in other words, your spirit goes out into and has nowhere to land. Now, all that kind of quality is Yugen. And the trick is to evoke the mood of Yugen, a certain sort of mysterious suggestiveness, by very simple means, which don't actually pin anything down. So that was the point of haiku poetry, to put this possibility within reach of people who had within themselves the capability, the sensitivity to appreciate the Yugen feeling.